remember what happened with Ephraim and the half-tribe of Manasseh? Chapter 22 outlines their going home. Do you remember that the Ephraim and the half-tribe of Manasseh actually asked to stay on the other side of the Jordan? At the end of Numbers, the last judgment of Moses was a compromise over this, which is interesting because one of the last statements in the book of Joshua is about the settlement of that. So it's almost like at the end of Moses' life, you're left with this problem with Ephraim and Manasseh, and at the end of Joshua's life, they sort of close up the problem. And there's a problem that develops, and I just want to take a few moments and look at it. A problem develops because of the sons of Gad and Reuben and the half-tribe of Manasseh. Look at verse 10. When they came to the region of the Jordan, which is in the land of Canaan, the sons of Reuben and the sons of Gad and the half-tribe of Manasseh built an altar there by the Jordan, a large altar in appearance. Now, if you read it in Hebrew, it doesn't say they built an altar in appearance. It says they built something that appeared to be an altar. That's an important distinction. They built this big platform. They were making a memorial before they went back over to the other side. And when they did it, it looked like an altar. It looked like a worship center. Now, they weren't supposed to be building a worship center. So the sons of Israel heard it and said, behold, the sons of Reuben and the sons of Gad and the half-tribe of Manasseh have built an altar at the frontier of the land of Canaan in the region of the Jordan, on the side belonging to the sons of Israel. When the sons of Israel heard it, the whole congregation of the sons of Israel gathered themselves at Shiloh to go up against them to war. What was at Shiloh? You're going to find out more about this in the book of Samuel. But Shiloh becomes the permanent resting place for the ark and the tabernacle before Jerusalem. So for 369 years, the tabernacle sat at Shiloh. Why did the people meet at Shiloh when they heard there was another altar? They're at the place where they met for worship. They come together at the worship center, because that's what Shiloh is. Mark somewhere next to verse 12 that Shiloh is where the worship center was at that time. Later on, the temple will be south in Jerusalem, but for right now, that temple hasn't even been built yet. So the tabernacle and all of its important things are placed over at Shiloh, and so they gather together and they go, these guys are making their own religion. They're not allowed to do that, are they? No, we can't let them do that. Oh, let's all grab our pitchforks and march on them. So it says, verse 13, the sons of Israel sent to the sons of Reuben, sons of Gad, the half-tribe of Manasseh, into the land of Gilead, Phinehas the son of Eleazar the priest, and with him 10 chiefs, one chief for each father's household from each of the tribes of Israel, and each one of them was the head of his father's household among the thousands of Israel. They came to the sons of Reuben and the sons of Gad and the half-tribe of Manasseh to the land of Gilead, and they spoke with them, saying, thus says the whole congregation of the Lord, what is this unfaithful act which you have committed against the God of Israel, turning away from the following the Lord this day by building yourselves an altar to rebel against the Lord this day? Now here's the problem. Next to verse 16, you can put jumped to conclusion. They saw something that looked like an altar. So they jumped to the conclusion that what these guys were doing was starting a different cultic practice. Is not the iniquity of Peor enough for us? What was Peor in Numbers 25?
Was that this stuff with Baal?
Yeah, it was the Moabite worship of Baal. It was the time they got sucked off into false worship. Isn't it enough that we did this once a generation ago, is what they're saying? In Numbers 25. Although a plague came on the congregation of the Lord, and you must turn away this day from following the Lord. If you rebel against the Lord today, he will be angry with the whole congregation of Israel tomorrow. What is their charge? What's their problem? Why are they mad at somebody else in another tribe doing something wrong? Because they came hot off the desert sands, and in Numbers 25 they learned a lesson. That when we allow sin to happen in that tribe, it ends up eating this tribe. That you guys may be going to live on the other side of the Jordan, but you're still part of us. And if on your way out of here you build a big altar and have a false god, it's going to come roll back and kill my kids. And I'm not putting up with it. So we're sending representatives of the 10 tribes on this side to tell you there is no way, we are not participating in this. You are wrong. Now here's the problem. That's not what they were doing. It's just what it looked like they were doing. Verse 20, did not Achan, the son of Zerah, act unfaithfully in the things under the ban, and wrath fell on the congregation of Israel, and that man did not perish alone in his iniquity? In other words, listen, don't you remember what happened with Achan? You're going to kill us all by doing that. 36 guys fell on the battle at Ai. I don't want to die because you want to be an idolater. The mighty one, God, the Lord, the mighty one, God, the Lord, he knows. And may Israel itself know, if it was in rebellion or if an unfaithful act against the Lord, do not save us this day. If we have built us an altar to turn away from following the Lord, or to turn burnt offering or grain offering on it, or if to offer sacrifices of peace offerings on it, may the Lord himself require of it. What was Reuben and Gad's answer in verses 22 and 23?
Well, if that's really what we're doing, God will judge us for it.
Yes. Are they saying they were doing it or they weren't doing it?
They said they weren't in rebellion.
They were not in rebellion. They set up an altar, and it was supposed to be a memorial of peace between the two sides of the Jordan. But when they did it, it looked like something else. Now, where can you use a passage like this? You have believers that do something and other believers that they think what they're doing is something that is wrong and sinful and going to hurt the body. But they're not. They just look like they are. Give me the back theme for 22 here. What do I do with this? Get down to verse 26. Therefore we said, let us build an altar, not for burnt offering or sacrifice. Rather, it will be a witness between us and you and between our generations after us. Here's the problem. On the side of the Gadites and Reubenites and half-tribe of Manasseh, here's the problem. You can do something and you know what you mean, but it's not what you think you're saying, it's what they think they're hearing that matters. You may think that you're communicating something, but you're communicating something completely different. And what's important is, for the believers of the half-tribe of Manasseh, Reuben, and Gad, the lesson is, listen, don't build something that looks like something that it isn't and try to give it a new meaning. Nobody knows what you're doing. It looks like you're doing wrong, okay? You may have the right intention, but if you're going to reach the other person, communication requires that you have clarity about what you're doing. Now, what about the side of the 10 tribes? What did they learn from this?
Don't jump to conclusions?
Certainly don't jump to conclusions, and it's easy to think you know the motives of other people. It's easy for you to see what you think you see and jump all the way to them. You're doing this to forsake God. They were doing nothing of the kind. They were trying to build a memorial of peace between the two sides, the tribes of the east and tribes of the west. But that's not what it looked like. So they immediately assumed that they were trying some new place for burnt offerings. Had they done burnt offerings in that place? Were there any burnt offerings there at that thing they called an altar? No. So they're already on the page of, you're doing this so you can do burnt offerings. And they're going, we haven't done any burnt offerings. Yeah, but that's what what? You know what I think I'm going to do? You don't get the right to judge other people's motives. And you don't know as much about those motives as you think you do. And so when you get to chapter 22, this is a great passage to give you a little background on a real conflict that comes up. The source of the conflict was bad communication and a poorly chosen monument. Okay? The end point is it actually did something very good. What did it do? Go to the end of the passage. Verse 29, far be it from us that we should rebel against the Lord and turn away from following the Lord this day by building an altar for burnt offering, grain offering, or for sacrifice, besides the altar of the Lord our God, which is before his tabernacle. So you see a consolidation of them saying, look, we didn't build it for that. We weren't going to. Far be it from us. We never intended it to be that. But this is what they went on to do. It says, when Phinehas the priest and the leaders of the congregation, even the heads of the families of Israel who were with them, heard the words which Reuben and Gad and the Manasseh spoke, it pleased them. Phinehas, the son of Eleazar the priest, said to the sons of Reuben and to the sons of Gad and to the sons of Manasseh, "Today we know the Lord is in our midst, because you have not committed this unfaithful act against the Lord. Now you have delivered the sons of Israel from the hand of the Lord." If I were you, I'd put a box around verse 31, and I would make a note somewhere that when they were found out to be wrong, they openly, clearly admitted they were wrong. Oops, we thought you were doing this, you weren't doing this, we now eat our words, we were wrong. And then they turn it a step further and say, not only did we used to be wrong, but hey guys, this is a great moment, because we just saw God heal a breach between us and turn it into something good. Why is that important? Because they're about to move on the east side of the Jordan, split by the deepest crack in the earth's surface that you can walk on the earth, with a couple tribes over here, the rest of the tribes there, and there's this little unity memorial set up, and they are disunified before they ever even leave. And in that unity, people start learning something like, before I assume that I understand what you're doing, I'm going to talk to you next time. Everybody gets humbled in this. And the humility will carry over in keeping the tribes bound together, even though there's a rift between them. This is a good moment. Can I remind you that any conflict can be turned around to a good and strengthening moment if it's handled properly? If both sides really do love each other, there's a way to turn the conflict around. And I would tell you that this conflict was turned around, and a good thing you could do is go back and look for principles of how they turned this conflict around. Make a note somewhere to go back and study the passage and say, what are principles on how to turn a conflict around? Because this is brilliant. They started off ready for war, and they ended up embracing each other, hugging and sobbing. I'd call that a great end. So now you go down to verse 32, Phinehas the son of Eleazar the priest and the leaders returned from the sons of Reuben, sons of Gad, and to the land of Gilead, to the land of Canaan, to the sons of Israel, and brought back word to them. Underline word to them. When the conflict was set aside, it had to be broadcast. Otherwise, people will still walk around with a chip on their shoulder. You have to remember something. In every conflict you have with somebody else, God gives grace to you, not to your roommate. You get into a conflict, someone hurts your feelings, you share it with your roommate, God gives you grace, you sit down with the person, you both, you all say you're sorry, you both sob, you're fine, you come back, and if you don't tell your roommate, they're still mad. Grace doesn't just automatically extend without people giving word of it. So it's necessary for you to clear it. We are so quick to talk when somebody else is doing something wrong, but we're pretty slow to talk when the situation has been reconciled. That's a good word right there. Now, verse 33, the word pleased the sons of Israel, and the sons of Israel blessed God, and they did not speak of going against them in war to destroy the land in which the sons of Reuben and the sons of Gad were living. Well, yeah, I think we won't go wipe them out now. Yeah, because they didn't do what you said. Verse 34, the sons of Reuben and the sons of Gad called the altar Ed. E-D, it's the word witness. They called the name of the place. Now, in my text, it actually says witness, but if you have a King James, it says, and they called the name of the place Ed, which every time I read it, it's just funny. Anyway, for Tom had already been taken. I don't know. And anyway, they called it Ed, the witness, for they said, it is a witness between us that the Lord is God. They didn't see it in the end. Did you notice? The symbol wasn't about the two human parties. They didn't end up saying, this is a great symbol of peace between our tribes. That's not what they saw. What did they see it as? The symbol was created by men to see a symbol of peace between men. But that's not how it ended up. How did they see it in verse 34?
Something between them and the Lord, because he was the one who pretty much stopped the conflict. As he said, now you have delivered the sons of Israel from the hand of the Lord.
The hardest single issue that the Israelites faced in the book of Joshua was the temptation to end up at war with each other. They were not a country. They were 12 tribes with independent territories. And you have to understand, they went through something like our country went through, from states' rights to strong federal government. This is still the time when the states rule. These are the colonials. and Pennsylvania was mad at New Jersey, and neither of them liked Vermont. That's how you should see this. They're very divided. And you know what they said? Only the Lord could put us together. You know what? The disciples said the same thing. Jesus talked to the disciples about a great many of their sins. Is that not true? But do you know the one time they said, Lord, increase our faith? The only time the disciples said, Lord, increase our faith, was when he told them to learn to forgive each other and get along. Why? Because the greatest single trouble we seem to have in the kingdom of God is not killing each other.
Okay, so were they like already bitter at them for like when I say they, I'm gonna go ahead and assume that you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
Okay. Bitter at them for like being there in the first place because they weren't supposed to be there?
I suspect, Zoe, that, I know that God intended all along that they would have that piece of land, but I suspect that when Moses made that compromise, it left some bitterness in a lot of people. Mm-hmm. And when you have bitterness in the background, it's easy to be drawn into conflict. Yeah. If somebody hurts you right now, 10 years from now, even if you sort of got it back together and everybody said they're sorry and whatever, if something else happens to another friend from that person, you're pretty quick to sign on board because you remember how bad they hurt you. I think you're right, and you're intuitive to think, is there anything left over from Moses? Yeah, I think there is. I think there's rest with the Canaanites, but there's a little bit of stir among the Israelites. And that's a funny part of this book. Shouldn't it be when the world is quiet because you've defeated them that the body should be okay? Every time in the book you see things lessen with the enemies, they start going after each other. Then things rise with the enemies and they sort of drop their problems with each other and go face outward. It's not dissimilar. I grew up in a big family, and I got to tell you, we could beat on each other, but if you pick on my brother, we're all going to come after you. Now, we would beat him up, but you don't get to beat him up because he's my brother and I'm the only one allowed to beat him up. And we sort of had these weird ideas. All right. Now, you get to the end of the book, and we're going to go to a break soon, but in 23, we get to the first speech, and in 24, the second speech. So just mark 23, first speech, 24, second speech. First speech is first speech of Joshua, and it is a farewell address from 1 to 16. And the second speech is 24, 1 to 28. And then 29 to 33 is 3 burials, 3 deaths, 3 burials, okay? I just want to take a moment and mention the addresses, and then we'll get to a break. Verse 1, chapter 23, now it came about after many days when the Lord had given rest to Israel from all the enemies on every side, and Joshua was old and advanced in years, that Joshua called all the people of Israel, their elders, their heads, their judges, their officers, and said to them, I am old. This is one of the more obvious openings. When they looked at him and he said, I am old, they all sort of knew. Then he put his teeth back in and he saith unto them, I am advanced in years, and you have seen all that the Lord your God has done to all these nations because of you. For the Lord your God is he who has been fighting for you. So I have apportioned to you these nations, which remain as an inheritance for your tribes, with all the nations which I have cut off from the Jordan, even to the great sea, Mediterranean, toward the setting of the sun. The Lord your God, he will thrust them out from before you and drive them from before you, and you will possess their land, just as the Lord your God promised you. Notice in verse 5, he's not saying they're all gone. He's saying God gave you peace and domination over them, and if you keep obeying, you will kick them all out. It hasn't been done yet. So don't get the idea that they were all gone and then came back. Okay? Verse 6, be very firm then, to keep and do all that is written in the book of the law of Moses, so that you may not turn aside from it to the left hand or to the right, so that you will not associate with these nations. Now, notice what he says. First thing he says is, pay attention to observe what God said. Second thing he said, don't, in the process of confronting the nations, conform to them. Don't become a part of them. Don't let them become a part of you. Don't associate in that way with these nations, these which remain among you, or mention the name of their gods. It doesn't say don't worship them. It says, don't even say the names of their gods. And then it says, nor make anyone swear by them or serve them or bow down to them. Here's a principle. God really didn't even want his people to, in a joke about Baal. This wasn't supposed, don't play with their cultic things at all. Leave them alone. In my view, I don't think you should be using Harry Potter to bring the gospel. I think using witchcraft to bring the gospel is like mentioning Baal in your sentences. I think there's what we're supposed to do, and there's what the world does, and what we're not supposed to do is try to find some way to be hip by incorporating their stuff into ours. And I recognize the gospel, according to Harry Potter, sold a lot of Christian books. And there's a lot of youth groups that studied it. Seriously, they did. And it was amazing. I went to 2 conferences in which they were pushing this stuff. And I'm standing there looking at them like, what is wrong with you? One of the things, God says, don't use the methodology of the false gods to try and bring in people. Here's what he says. He says, you are to cling to the Lord your God as you have done to this day. That's an interesting word. It's not enough to obey God. He wants you to cling to him. He wants you to actually, when you cling to something, what's the difference between holding and clinging? Yeah, if you're hanging off the end of the cliff, is that called holding or clinging? Clinging. You're clinging. It's something passionate and desperate. It's something where you realize that the outcome of not clinging is death. That's why that word is chosen. Okay? So I want you to cling to the Lord. I want you to see your life emanates from your obedience to him. Remember what he said in Deuteronomy 6? You'll live long if you just do what I tell you. Your families will be good if you do what I tell you. And what's interesting is it says, verse 9, the Lord has driven out great and strong nations from before you. Okay, verse 9, beginning of verse 9, here's the principle. You didn't beat them because they were weak. God drove out strong nations. Don't think you can get so strong that God can't topple you as well. It's not about your strength. It's about the clinging to him. So it says in verse 9, and as for you, no man has stood before you to this day. One of your men puts a flight to 1,000, for the Lord your God is he who fights for you, just as he promised you. The principle is really simple. If you will spend your time focusing on being obedient to God, God will fight the battles you can't fight. And that's just the truth. You can try to go out and fight all your battles, or you can try walking with God and let him fight them. Very often I have found that you will win more on your knees than you will on the telephone. Trying to fix the problem, sometimes the best place to fix the problem is just with the Lord. And if the Lord prompts you to make a call, then make a call. But don't think you have to run around and save yourself. You don't. Interestingly enough, it says, so take diligent heed to yourselves to love the Lord your God. He slows down. He's an older man. When you say to somebody, take diligent heed, what you're doing is this is what I say when any of my kids carves something with a knife. Take diligent heed. Pay attention to what you're doing. Don't talk to somebody doing this. Okay? Because I don't want to spend the rest of the day in the emergency room. Take diligent heed. Pay focal, close, deliberate, full attention. And what does he tell them to pay all that attention to? To love the Lord your God. Walking with God should take effort. It should take attention. If you're standing up and walking as you are called to do, you will be exhausted by it. That's not wrong. No one ever sinks easily into holiness. It doesn't happen that way. You have to go against your nature and against the flow of fallen man. And then you get to this, verse 12. For if you ever go back and cling to the rest of the nations, these which remain among you, and intermarry with them so that you associate with them and they with you, know with certainty that the Lord will not continue to drive out these nations out from before you, and they will be a snare and a trap and a whip on your sides and thorns in your eyes until you perish from off this good land which the Lord your God has given you. Now, I don't think you need to really to look hard to see a contrast here. Cling to the Lord your God as opposed to clinging to this people. And he says, this one will bring you life and rest, and this one will bring you a world of hurt from which you will finally be extricated from this property. Behold, today I am going the way of all the earth. This is Josh going, I'm going to be dying here, so I need you to listen up. You know in all your hearts and in all your souls that not one word of all the good words which the Lord your God spoke concerning you has failed. All have been fulfilled for you. Not one of them has failed. He's not stuttering, he's making it a point. In Hebrew, when you say it twice, you're making a point. When you say it twice, you're making a point. And that's what he's doing. It shall come about, just as all the good words which the Lord your God spoke to you have come upon you. So the Lord will bring you all the threats until he has destroyed you from off this good land which the Lord your God has given you. And when you transgress the covenant of the Lord your God, which he commanded you, and go and serve other gods and bow down to them, then the anger of the Lord will burn against you, and you will perish quickly from off the good land which he has given you. Shortly after this, he is going to die. And you see in chapter 24 that he gathers them for one final speech. Now, Joshua in chapter 24 verse 1 says he gathered all the tribes of Israel to Shechem and called for the elders of Israel and for their heads and their judges and their officers, and they presented themselves before God. So he gathers the people, the representatives of the people, as they come together. And Joshua said to all the people, thus says the Lord, the God of Israel, from ancient times your fathers lived beyond the river, namely Terah, the father of Abraham, and the father of Nahor, and they served other gods. Then I took your father Abraham from beyond the river and led them through all the land of Canaan and multiplied his descendants and gave him Yitzhak or Isaac. To Isaac I gave Jacob and Esau. To Esau I gave Mount Seir to possess it. But to Jacob and his sons they went down to Egypt. Then I sent Moses and Aaron, and I plagued Egypt by what I did in its midst, and afterwards I brought you out. I brought your fathers out of Egypt, and you came to the sea, and Egypt pursued your fathers with chariots and horsemen to the Red Sea. But when they cried out to the Lord, he put darkness between you and the Egyptians and brought the sea upon them and covered them. And your own eyes saw what I did in Egypt, and you lived in the wilderness for a long time. Then I brought you out into the land of the Amorites, who lived beyond the Jordan, and they fought with you. And I gave them into your hand, and you took possession of their land when I destroyed them before you. Then Balak, the son of Zippor, king of Moab, rose and fought against Israel, and he sent Balaam and summoned him, the son of Beor, to curse you. But I was not willing to listen to Balaam, so he had to bless you, and I delivered you from his hand. You crossed the Jordan, you came to Jericho, and the citizens of Jericho fought against you, and the Amorite, and the Perizzite, and the Canaanite, the Hittite, the Girgashite, the Hivite, the Jebusite. Thus I gave them into your hand. Then I sent the hornet among you, and drove out 2 kings of the Amorites from before you, but not by your sword or by your bow. By the way, that's something we would otherwise probably not know much about. And then he says in verse 13, I gave you a land on which you had not labored, cities which you had not built, and you have lived in them. You are eating of vineyards and olive groves which you did not plant. Now therefore fear the Lord. This is the first command he offers. Everything has been a history from the beginning of his statement. So from verse 2 all the way down to verse 13, he offers a short history of the people. And then in verse 14, he turns and gives commands to the people. And he says, fear the Lord, serve him with sincerity and truth, and put away the gods which your fathers served beyond the river and in Egypt, and serve the Lord. He said, among you, I want you to clearly put away all of the past gods that have still lingered in the midst of the camp. If it is disagreeable in your sight to serve the Lord, choose yourselves today whom you will serve, whether the gods which your fathers served, which were beyond the river, or the gods of the Amorites in the land in which you are living. But as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. One of the great verses that comes from this text. The people answered, far be it from us that we should forsake the Lord to serve other gods. For the Lord our God, he is who brought us out and our fathers up out of the land of Egypt from the house of bondage, and who did great signs in our sight and preserved us all the way in which we went and among all the peoples through which whose midst we passed. The Lord drove out from before us all the peoples, even the Amorites who lived in the land. We also will serve the Lord, for he is our God. So Joshua then said to the people, you will not be able to serve the Lord, for he is a holy God. He is a jealous God. He will not forgive your transgression of your sin or your sins. If you forsake the Lord and serve foreign gods, then he will turn and do harm and consume you after he has done good to you. The people said, no, but we will serve the Lord. What did that mean? Why did he say that? God will not be able to forgive you. What is he talking about? It's that simple statement. We made it before. God is for you when you are for his plan. Don't blame God for not being against his own plan. Okay? So when you're for the other God, you're not for this God. And ultimately, he says, Joshua said to the people, verse 22, you are witnesses against yourself that you have chosen for yourselves the Lord to serve him. And they said, we are witnesses. He's actually getting them to re-covenant themselves before the Lord. That's what's going on here. Now, therefore, put away the foreign gods which are in your midst and incline your hearts to the Lord God of Israel. The people said, we will serve the Lord our God and we will obey his voice. So Joshua made a covenant with the people that day and made for them a statute and an ordinance in Shechem. And Joshua wrote all these words in the book of the law, and he took a large stone and set it up there under the oak, which was set by the sanctuary of the Lord. Joshua said to all the people, behold, this stone shall be a witness against us, for it has heard all the words of the Lord. Now look at the way he says this. The rock heard us. The stone remembers what we said. This stone is a witness against us. It has heard all the words which he spoke to us. Thus it shall be for a witness against you, so that you do not destroy or do not deny your God. And Joshua dismissed the people, each to his inheritance. And that's the last thing, the last act of Joshua. This record is probably another piece of record that was left there. And Samuel decided, I think, not to put it at the end of chapter 11, but to extend the legal documents and put this at the back end of it. And then in order to close the book the way they closed the Torah, the Torah closes essentially with the death of Moses. He decides to close this with the death of Joshua, and then puts in the other two, the priest that dies, and Eleazar, son of Aaron, and also the burial of the bones of Joseph. So you end up with 3 burials, and the 3 burials are in verses 29 to 33. Everybody know who got buried at the end of the book? You know who these 3 are? Bones of Joseph. Joseph who?
Joseph, the one who got sold into slavery.
Yeah, Joseph, the patriarch, the last of the patriarchs. Remember, although he lived his life in Egypt, he wanted to be buried in the land of his fathers, and they do that. By the way, that's why Joseph's tomb is in Shechem with all the other patriarchs in Hebron. Shechem's in the north. It's in the north part of the West Bank. That area has been a very hotly contested. It's an all-Arab area today with Jewish worshipers in the heart of an Arab city. So it really, it's as peaceful as it sounds. At any rate, beyond Joseph, then there's also Eleazar, son of Aaron, remember the high priest. So what happens in verse 33 when Eleazar dies? Yeah, anybody in a refuge state is released back to their home territory. And this begins the process. Now, we also have the death of Joshua. So close off Joshua now. And what you're going to find is that with the death of Joshua and the death of Joshua, eventually Caleb and the generation of Joshua, there's a changing of the guard, and eventually the feeling of Israel shifts. When Joshua was there, he gave a sense that all 12 tribes had one unity behind them. When he died, there wasn't an heir apparent. Look, you went through the process of spending a long time studying Moses and his writings, right? But then Ben sat with you and walked you through all of the time God trained up Joshua, right? Who takes over after Josh? Nobody. And the problem is now you have 12 tribes. They're not all cohesive. They don't all have the same public school system. Not everybody's happy with each other. And the tribes from time to time get into deep emotional and permanent struggles with one another. And the book of Judges and the book of Ruth are set in a time period when the Confederate states of Israel, or the Confederate sons or tribes of Israel, are linked together in a patchwork quilt, but often they're at odds with one another.